But we have a great expert on talking about a conflict that the United States normally forgets, but one that is critical for our Army's history. So, Joe, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. I know a lot of you guys are busy on the holidays, so I appreciate you tuning in. But I will guarantee you this, before this brief is over, you'll probably be the handful of a couple hundred people that will be aware of the full story of what the Army did in Somalia. Many of us remember Somalia in the sense of the Battle of Mogadishu. That's kind of burned into our memory. But the Army and the Army Special Forces were in Somalia from 1992 to 1995. So my intent on this book, which is going to be published by the University of North Georgia up in Dahlonega, and if you've ever been a Ranger, you know that's the location of the Ranger Mountain Camp. We think it'll be published in the spring. It's going to be about 500 pages. Of note, it's going to have pictures never seen before by the public, and I think it will probably be the one and only true book that tells the whole story of what happened throughout Somalia and in every sector. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, notwithstanding the weather matters at home just preclude me from getting there. I like to, in retirement, write about missing pieces of Special Forces history. We don't really have a robust history section, nor are funded for it. So we sort of rely on, advocates of SOF and retirees to spread the word about how we use and apply special operations power. The first slide you should have been introduced to is the facsimile of the cover of the book. I'm not sure what University of North Georgia would do. What I'm looking at now is the next slide. The three, to keep it simple, what I think are the three main blocks of our involvement: some background, peacemaking, and withdrawal. And I refer you just to the map for a minute. So Somalia looks like a 7. If you took the top, it would stretch from Chicago to the east to about New York, and from New York down the coastline down at about Jacksonville, Florida. There's a tyranny of distances for operating in Somalia. Not that if you had a helicopter or an aircraft, you couldn't. It's just if you're road bound, there are very few paved roads in Somalia. Okay, Mike, next slide. So Somalians are heterogeneous in that they speak the same language. They come from the Cushitic tribe north out of Kenya, the Somal tribe. There are 4 major royal clans and 3 minor clans. They are generally grouped into agriculturalists and pastoralists, the camel and cattle being the main trade with pastoralists, although there is a merchant class. Okay, next slide, Mike.
Okay, so sub-armed clans.
Okay, this is what confused me when I was there, and many intelligence folks. I'll try to keep it simple. So here are the 4 main thug warfighting groups. If you try to do an analogy like mafia families in different cities, and then subcategories, the fighting in Somalia was basically between the Darude clan and the Hawaii clan. Okay, next slide. We'll look at some pictures of Somalia.
Yep.
Kind of immerse you. Okay, it's from the coastline. It's an arid desert country. As you go further north, you get into some mountainous terrain. Temperatures kind of like New Mexico, West Texas. What is interesting is there are 2 major rivers that flow from Ethiopia, and they're full-time rivers. They are not affected by drought. And most of the people who went in on the humanitarian intervention remarked it was amazing that people were starving when there was lush vegetation and crops along these rivers. But the starving was a function of the politicization of the warring clans against the people. Okay, next slide. Again, a confusing array of clan political organizations. Siad Barre assassinated the president on 21 October 1969, thus naming the 21 October Road in northern Mogadishu. And America practiced benign neglect in the Horn, but as the Cold War heated up and the Horn became important, the alliances shifted. Sometimes we supported Ethiopia when they started courting the Soviets. Then we supported Somalia. When the Soviets courted Somalia, Siad Barre decided to convert to democratic socialism. So he already had the hatred of the other clans, and he made a few major errors. They had a war with Ethiopia over the Agadan region along the border. There was some scorched earth tactics up in Somaliland, up in the northern Somalia. Anyway, these foment anti-government movements. If I can make it easy for you, in the north are the SSDF, the Somali Socialist Democratic Front. They are just going to be separatists, go their own way. In the middle, you're going to have the Somali National Alliance. The main gang, if you will, is Aideed and the SNA. And in the south, you're going to have the remnants of the presidential regime of Siad Barre. If that makes it easier for you. Okay, next slide. I'll take you a little tour around some of the major landmarks. So when you read the history of Somalia, or you go through, hopefully, the book that's going to be published, what you're looking at is the old port area, and then the green line that's separated, even amongst the Hawaii clan. Aideed's Haber-Dieter was separated from Ali Mahdi's Abgal. Mahdi was voted in to be the president after overthrowing the dictator. Aideed disagreed with it. The lower left, the K4 traffic circle, is going to be a scene of a lot of fighting because 4 or 5 major roads go through the intersection. It's down near the airport. And then the Newport area is where we're going to deliver supplies and humanitarian relief. The next slide is the U.S. Embassy. It was evacuated in 71. But when we go back in there, it's going to be a key piece of terrain. The Mogadishu Airport, an international airport, of course. And then a picture of the university where the 10th Mountain Division is going to have their camp. Next slide should be the clan leaders.
Right.
And again, I remind you, almost all these pictures have never been seen. They were taken by veterans. So you got all the clan leaders, Colonel Yusuf in the north with the SSDF. You got Aideed and Colonel Jess and Morgan. Although they both side with Aideed, they clash with each other over control of Kismail. Next slide is some of the threat. Now, what I thought to do is a lot of books look at Somalia from the angle of humanitarian intervention, and I decided I would look at it from the angle of irregular warfare. And once I did that, it actually, I was better able to understand what occurred. So the place is flush with arms, awash in arms from the previous support of the U.S. and the Soviets. The humanitarian organizations to get in there to feed people have to pay Somali clan militia landing fees, protection fees, and their trucks with guns on them come under UN funding. They couldn't pay for armed patrols, so they wrote it in as a technical support, and thus we get the word technicals. And it's ragbag, it's regular warfare, primitive warfare. But Somalis, pretty much natural born guerrillas, pastoralists who guard their herds, wander, have to hunt, have to survive, are kind of natural born guerrillas. Okay, next slide. Somalia was one of the largest armed countries in the Horn of Africa. And so the countryside and the cities are littered with Soviet and American military weapons. Okay, next slide. Once Mogadishu is seized from the dictator, he and his forces flee south to the Kenyan border. And what Aideed does is, in clan hatred, wants to get rid of the Darood clan. He pretty much is supported by all the other clans in this venture until his head gets a little big and he wants to take too much territory. This map generally outlines a series of his offenses to remove them from the capital. Okay, the next slide is part 2, peacemaking. And then the next slide.
Operation Provide Relief.
Okay. So President George H.W. Bush Sr. is getting ready for the presidential elections in the fall of '92. After the UN participated to overthrow, to gain victory in Kuwait, there was a sense of that term, the New World Order, and that politics had been realigned. So with multilateral organizations and people with muscle power, you could solve some of the other problems of the world. You could help fledgling democracies, resolve hunger, eradicate diseases, and so forth. And so as the CNN effect took place of people watching starving Somalis, President George H.W. Bush decided that he would then support the UN in its intervention. Now, the hunger, again, I told you, was a politicization of food, where the clans denied food relief to the areas they were fighting in, and either stole or confiscated the food. President George H.W. Bush is convinced we could do something, and Operation Provide Relief is launched. It is a task force under Marine Corps General Aideed, goes to Mombasa, Kenya, with C-130s to start flying into 4 humanitarian relief sectors to deliver food. Okay, next slide. This slide merely shows you the 4 airfields. President Moi in Kenya is adamant that he is not supporting armed aircraft and people flying out of his country. So there's a bit of a dilemma on who's going to protect the aircraft. The U.S. Army Special Forces are chosen. Go ahead to the next slide. They're chosen to come up with a concept to guard the pilots and aircraft when they're operating in Somalia. It's called the ASAT concept. I think it's the Aerial Support Assault Team. It's got two components. One is they load the aircraft, and one C-130 circles the airfield. The other aircraft is also loaded with half a special forces team, their vehicles and weapons, which they apply once they clear Kenyan airspace. So that solves kind of the combat search and rescue concern of the Air Force. Okay, the next slide is, it is not without peril. You've got gunfire from conflicts of the militia over who's going to extort the food flights. You got aircraft being shot at. The militia who are hired by the UN, but not very disciplined. And then the other dangers like misunderstandings at the airfield, landmines laid in the runways. The teams perform this mission, about 5 special forces teams perform this mission about 4 or 5 months going in to early December. Okay, next slide.
This Scannigo shows provide relief August to December.
Okay. I believe something like 23,000 short tons of food are delivered. It's 2,000 flights. We're not the only country who provides C-130s, but it's not getting the job done. CNN effect still kicking in. People are still starving. So General Colin Powell looks at an assessment of it and tells the president, if we're going, let's go big. And they do. And they come up with the Unified Task Force for Restore Hope. This is going to have well over 18 to 20 some thousand US troops. It's going to be special ops, the 10th Mountain, and the Marine Corps, and then a variety of contributing nations. They are retasked to go out to the other airfields and assess them. It is during this period, somewhere around the first week of December, they have their first encounter with clan militia when armed technicals conduct aggressive movements. And fortunately, a good old Marine AH-1 Cobra, Sea Cobra, flies by and puts an end to the aggression. Okay, next slide should be just a separation slide,
Right.
For Restore Hope. And then a slide after that.
Operation
Restore Hope hits the ground, I think, around the 9th of December. Some of us remember the pictures of the SEALs landing on the beach, met by all the news crew. Unbeknownst to the news crew, Army Special Forces teams were in Mogadishu and at every airfield, having them all prepped and ready for the oncoming UN troop. CENTCOM takes the lead. They divide Somalia into 9 humanitarian relief zones. Now remember, Somaliland in the north is moving towards independence. So for the rest of the engagements and the time we're in Somalia, you can pretty much just blank that part out. It doesn't enter the equation, other than diplomatic. The 9 special forces teams from all 4 active special forces groups support the mission. Ambassador Oakley is a special representative, and Again, CENTCOM provides the leadership. I was wrong earlier. There are 28,000 U.S. service folks and 17,000 from contributing nations. Okay, the next slide is org chart. So you get a notion of the special operations component. More so, you just see an illustration of the variety of org charts that are in the book. The book has over hundreds of pictures, organizational charts, maps, and diagrams. Okay, the next slide, the folks in the control tower. There you see those waning days of provide relief, inspecting the other airfields. One special forces team roams all of Mogadishu on a recon. And the lower right corner is the Marine Corps helicopter taking on the technicals. Okay, next slide. So the Allies get into Mogadishu. Now, the plan is, let's get Mogadishu and Kismayo open, because with their seaports and airports, you can get a lot of tonnage of food in, and then branch out to the easiest outlying areas that have half decent dirt roads to get the food flow. Some of these pictures are the Italians and Marines in Mogadishu. UN charters Soviet helicopters there. The lower right is a contingent from Saudi Arabia. A lot of the countries, smaller countries, only want to serve in Mogadishu and are dependent on American largesse, equipment, and logistic supplies. Okay, next slide. Again, I told you this book was put together by veterans. What you see are some of the illustrations they provided with their patrol logs, radio logs, personal diaries, pictures, and then they drew their humanitarian relief sectors. But we're going to have Army Special Forces out in every humanitarian relief sector to support Belgians, Italians, French, Canadians for the most part. The Americans are in phase one of this operation are doing so well. The Americans are going to take over some of the easier ones, like America to the southeast of Mogadishu and the airfield at Ballydoodle. Okay, next slide just illustrates some of the 10th Mountain operations. At this point, we're not really fighting irregulars. We are fighting probably malcontents and some of the looters and the thugs and the bandits who've been stealing food. See a Marine Corps helicopter at Battle Wayne. Provide relief aircraft are still flying. There's a picture of a charter and then Marine Corps delivering food. Next slide. Each phase of the Somalia operation has multiple special forces teams. I'm just going to speak briefly about three. They're kind of interesting. The special forces teams link up with their counterparts in their countries. The special forces teams generally have the same language, have 2 to 4 of our modified Humvees. They link up, do training, move to Mogadishu, and then move out. The French team deploys in a road march from Mogadishu, from Baidoa, and then on to Odor, I think. where the French established their operations. Next slide. The team who put the most mileage on and actually does multiple deployments to Somalia, ODA 526, deploys with the Marines out to Bardera. But what's interesting, and is in the book, they are the first team to have an encounter with a terrorist of the Al-Ittihad al-Islami. This terrorist organization is headquartered out in Luke, which is out in the southern portion near the Ethiopian border. And they're going to have an engagement where they get aggressed after they visit the elders out there. They're going to kill a couple and destroy one of their technicals, which I guess you could claim that's the first conflict engagement in the global war on terrorism. Okay, next slide is Beledweyne. The Canadians helped take Baladugal. Once the U.S. Army arrives, they relieve them of that, and they go to Beledweyne. Beledweyne is in the central region near the Ethiopian border. The mission up there, along with protecting humanitarian relief, is reconnaissance of the Egyptian border and their daily contacts with Ethiopian forces in the border town of Furfur. The commander of the Canadians finds that his sector does not quite match the conditions on the ground, and he needs to extend east. And what the 5 special operations, Army special operations teams do for him is conduct reconnaissance to try to figure out and locate where the armed forces are. Now, Aideed's forces, the leftovers from the clan war, the Somalian National Alliance, are up there, but it's sort of a stalemate. They've run against the wall of the Somaliland forces under Colonel Yusuf and the SSDF. And quite frankly, they are up there fighting other clans who used to be united to overthrow the dictator. The team lodges with a Canadian, I call them motorized armored forces, who have a variety of wheeled vehicles. The threats up there are going to be attacks by the clan, minefields, and then random pot shots by bandits. America agreed to conduct the operation with the caveat we were not going to do disarmament. The UN does get the clan leaders to sit down and agree that their heavy weapons will be put into cantonments. So there is monitoring of that in all the humanitarian sectors. One day, the team and the Canadians moved east to the town of Balanbale, where they were taken under attack by small arms, machine gun fire, mortars, and for the couple of tanks they had running, fired either an M41 tank or an M47 tank that they had hauled out of the cantonment. And you can see in the picture just a horrendous amount of ordnance and demolitions left over. And where they could, Canadian engineers and Special Forces team engineers rigged all that stuff for explosion, which is going to be true in every humanitarian sector. Okay, the next slide shows some of the activities and below in the ordinance. The team up there planning patrols. And then one picture in the lower right, it's just the staff up there with the 5th Special Forces Group Commander. Now, in the end of January, the other Special Forces teams from the other groups are sent home with sort of phase 1 of Restoro done, getting the major airfields, ports, and towns open. This period is kind of phase 2, if you will, of expanding some of the UN mandate. Okay, next slide. You'll see just some of the heavy weapons that were in cantonment. There's a picture, kind of rare, of the Canadian paratroopers with a special forces team getting ready for patrol. And then down on the lower right, Captain C.B. Smith wrote about a 400-page diary with his pictures, which is probably the most detailed rendition of what occurred in one of the humanitarian sectors. This is a picture of him meeting with the tribal elders. And this team also were the first to contact the leaders of the Somali National Alliance up in that area, something the UN and their representatives had not been able to do to discuss ceasefire and peace stuff. Unfortunately, next slide. Unfortunately, knowledge of a meeting resulted in a mine planted in the road. When it blew, Sergeant First Class Deeks was pretty mangled up. He was the medic on the team. He died from his wounds, and 2 other Special Forces operatives were wounded. There's a representation of the original map from Captain Smith, just showing you location of minefields. Okay, next slide is, we're going to switch to Kismayo. In this phase 2, if you will, Colonel Morgan and Colonel Jess are vying over possession of Kismayo. When they don't accede to the terms of UNITAF, the 10th Mountain, led by a 1-star general, establishes a task force with the Belgians. And the 5th group sends a small command and control element and 2 teams to go down and assist. The problem down there is all the ex-regime guys are all jammed against the Kenyan border. And the Belgians don't have the vehicles, the TTPs, or operating methods to go out and conduct patrols and link up with the clan leaders, or in our doctrine, we call it the G chiefs. So that's the role the SF teams do. And they're actually quite successful with it, moving in and living with the G chiefs, which is part of our unconventional warfare doctrine. After both Colonel Morgan and Jess get punished by the task force Kismayo, there's sort of a quiet time for negotiations to continue. Although they're down there, the teams continue recon out to the Kenyan border, and they do get in one small firefight, which is unresolved because the Somalians are using the civilian population as a shield. It's a portending of things to come. Okay, next slide. Just some pictures of the teams down there on patrol. When they are done down there, they are evacuated off the shore onto Navy, I guess if they still had LSTs, and they are sent back to Mogadishu once things quiet down. Okay, next slide. Not to take away from other Army elements, the civil affairs and the psychological operations folks do some tremendous work. They are not under the command and control of the Special Operations Task Force, but they are missioned by the UNITEF. But again, yeoman work. Okay, next slide. Ought to be a divider slide for continued hope. When President George H.W. Bush made the decision to go, one of the things, as he lost the election, he wanted to guarantee President Clinton would not have Somalia as a problem for the new administration. So he wanted to, get folks fed, which by this point, that's going on, and get out of there by at least April. The UN, slow in its bureaucracy, gets it together, and in the early month of April, the operation is now named Continue Hope. Lieutenant General Burr is a Turkish general with a lot of respect. Got a little bit of combat under his belt, but there are going to be some American forces remaining, along with Brown and Root's big logistical effort to keep the UN supplied. So there's going to be a brigade from the 10th Mountain. The Marines are gone. The Navy moves on to some other deployment. And we got a couple of residual SF teams that are left. The major in charge, Major Jesmer, has now kind of got the weight of of the whole thing on his shoulders. SOCCENT's gone. Basically, Jesmer is it. He's the special ops advisor. Let's go to the next slide. Aideed is obviously not satisfied that even by now, he's not the president of Somalia. One day in June, the Pakistanis are ambushed. There's another section of Pakistanis at a feeding station. They try to go to rescue. They're ambushed. And 24 Pakistani soldiers were killed, 50 wounded. 4 journalists who rushed to the scene are killed and mangled and dragged through the streets. Again, a portending of things to come. Of diplomacy, the UN cannot look like it can't enforce its resolutions. So a reward is sent out. Nobody can prove Aideed did it, but everybody pretty much acts like he did it. The reward goes out. And obviously, this is a crisis by providing aerial observation in a program that's going to be called Eyes Over Mogadishu. They have several successful engagements during this period, not with Special Forces Board, but a 10th Mountain Aviation Brigade Black Hawk is shot down and crashes in the Newport area. Again, worth repeating, a portending of things to come. Okay, next slide. The rhetoric from Aideed ratchets up, where he's openly threatening the UN and its forces. He has rallies. He owns Radio Mogadishu. So the UN moves to destroy the radio station. Next slide. In June, the task force, the UN task force on the hunt for Aideed, conducts Operation Casablanca. If you will, to simplify this chart, the Moroccans have the outer cordon, like a U-shaped horseshoe. This area of Mogadishu is next to the embassy. People call it Elvis's neighborhood. The Pakistani 5th and 7th Frontier Forces are going to pierce into the interior. Now, before this, AC-130 gunships were employed to hit key targets in the neighborhood: weapons storage, headquarters, militia barracks, and they pound the place for the nights of the 15th and 16th. Now, what we're going to try, Mike, if you can, that little video I gave you. Explosions from Sergeant Bowers, Mark 19. There were 3 special forces teams with the attack, one in the north, Bowers, one with the Pakistanis, and one in the south. The south had Italians. The French were on standby for rescue. It's a pretty vicious battle. Runs about 5 hours. No telling how many Somalis are killed. Every form of firepower is used, and to include tear gas. The Special Forces Humvee is shot up by heavy weapons fire, RPG, and is actually towed back to a protective position by another Army liaison team who were with the Moroccans. Okay, next slide. This picture shows from the map in the upper right corner the intersection of phase line dog and yellow, I believe.
Now, this is a picture of the hunt for Aideed. It shows
I got it.
Humvee. Okay.
Actually, we're tracking. Okay, that building right in the center is where you would have seen the helicopter attacks and the Mark 19 attacks. And then the house in the lower left is the center of the street on the northern edge of the neighborhood where they sought protection. After this battle, later on in the month, there was an ambush 3 Humvees from the Special Forces teams are headed to the airport. There's an ambush, pretty good sized firefight, and 3 people are wounded pretty badly, require medevac. Okay, next slide. This is, I probably should have put this slide earlier, but just to see the effects of the BDA. There's a live picture of gunship fire, but you see the cigarette factory, the lower left, radio deed with its aerial, and the lower right is like a truck park where they convert trucks into technicals. All in another name they had was Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Okay, next slide. As we get into August, the rotation is due. The new Special Forces company comes in, and the first of their tasks is to go conduct a reconnaissance north of Mogadishu along the coast in Hobyo. Only problem is there are no specialized helicopters. So the decision is made to at least go do a reconnaissance using the UN Russian aircraft. There's a sort of a anger clash with the residents up there who harass the teams, even though they try to move around. The reconnaissance does not result in anything. Okay, next slide. Later that month, the U.S. decides to send the experts from the Joint Special Operations Command. You see the little birds. The circle is the approximate area of the target. Target was not the Olympic Hotel. In the lower left, I think everybody's seen one of the few combat pictures. You got to remember 1993, a lot of people did not have digital cameras and video. And oh, by the way, if you've been shot at, you don't really take the time to take photos. You're a bit busy. But we all know now a helicopter's shot down. Now, there are plenty of books on this battle. I tried to cover it with a kind of a succinct chapter to give credit where credit's due. Okay, next slide. And the neighborhood, and consequently, when the Rangers go to, and the CSAR team goes to rescue the chopper pilots and crew, the second chopper shot there. There's a picture of the Pakistani stadium where the battle culminates after they've been rescued. Then if you haven't been to the Special Operations Museum in Fayetteville, there were some artifacts from that battle, along with a lot of other good Army stuff. If you haven't been, worth the visit. Go ahead. Next slide. Just some more artifacts. Was able to go to a preview and meet the actual participants and stars in the movie. There's a couple of misnomers, merely because it's a Hollywood action movie, but there were no technicals on the streets during that time of the battle. Okay, next slide. As a result of the battle, the world is horrified, along with the United States, of watching American soldiers dragged through the streets. President Clinton orders a full-up deployment and for the U.S. forces to get out of Somalia by March, end of March, 1994. A massive amount of firepower is deployed under Major General Ernst. The 24th Mech Division is going to provide Bradleys and tanks and artillery. The soft contingent brings back AC-130s. Then there's a Navy and Marine component. Next slide. Now, the UN is still out in the humanitarian relief zones, but American Army Special Forces and other U.S. Army forces are now pulled back into Mogadishu. So you see some pictures of ongoing operations. Lower right is the new Special Forces Commander, Briefing General Celeski on our sniper systems. Okay, next slide. Some other activities, the Army expands its bases, builds a couple of 2 or 3 new bases. UN operations still continue in Mogadishu. Lower left is DARPA providing Kevlar blankets to the Humvees. And there's a Joint Chiefs of Staff directed force protection survey, which is handed to the Special Forces to conduct, which provides a lot of great material for how the remaining military forces can protect themselves. Although the mission soon becomes protect the force for the remaining time. Go ahead, next slide. One of the contributing things for protecting the force, the SOF task force opened up a sniper program to enforce rules of engagement. You don't want Somalis carrying RPGs or machine guns. These are various sniper positions around town and kind of an approximation. This is a pretty effective program. Kill a lot of people and wound and damage technicals, and it keeps a good, strong perimeter around American and UN positions. Next slide. Other activities include another recon, Kismayo. We got humanitarian activities. We got some foreign internal defense, security assistance, training some of our UN partners on our weapon systems. Next slide. These are Pakistanis with our kind of like Lend-Lease 113s and tanks, working out their new 50 calibers. On the right, diplomatically, the Special Forces support Admiral Gillespie's trip to meet with Aideed and Colonel Yusuf up in Bosaso in Somaliland. And you share personal private escort down there at the bottom. Go ahead. By the end of December, most of Americans have withdrawn to the beach. The SEALs have a huge engagement, sniper engagement, coming out of the K4 traffic circle, which involves the intervention of attack helicopters. Other than that, it's everybody packing up. Unfortunately, towards the end, a flare got stuck in an AC-130 tube, and Jockey 14 goes down on fire off the Kenyan coast. 3 guys parachute, 2 are saved, 7 inside, or I believe 3 died from those. They actually put cables on it, dragged the plane to the beach, dismantled it, fly it back to the States, but a tragic end. Go ahead, next slide. All right, next slide. We are tasked to be prepared to conduct a NEO in the event of chaos coming from all the withdrawals. The SOCSAN is chosen as the lead. Fifth group is going to be ground element. It's going to include Rangers, SOP, Civil Affairs, Air Force, Special Ops, be conducted out of Bali, Dougal, backhaul citizens to Kenya. There's a big rehearsal goes on in June. Reason for this, the Navy and Marines have a gap, can't cover Somalia. So SOCSAN's on the hook, but it doesn't come to anything. Next slide. We also got to start getting America Lend-Lease gear, a lot of weaponry from the failed police program, all gets scooped up and backhauled. Next slide. The UN calls it quits. Time to go. We declare Operation United Shield under General Zinni. These are the teams preparing in Mombasa. Go aboard ship. Go ahead, next slide. Conduct amphibious landings. Everybody's crouched behind the sand dune at the Mogadishu airport. Next slide. Just some pictures of the teams with their counterparts. They don't get to get off the airfield. They do get pot shot at. There's only one excursion out to save somebody where they get fired on, but pretty much for the month, quiet. Go ahead, next and last. Nope, next to last slide. Again, just activities. Okay, last slide. Egyptians are gone. Malaysians are gone. We got to get the Pakistanis over to the Newport area. The SF teams lead with their Humvees after conducting drills. Everybody gets aboard ship, comes home happily ever after. And we say goodbye to Somalia. Today, in conclusion, of course, we still do drone strikes on terrorists. We are training Somali Special Forces, small contingent, 500 Americans in Somalia. So again, just part of the CT. I, again, would like to thank Mike and the Army Historical Society for a great opportunity. I don't know when the book's coming, sometime in the spring. I hope everybody enjoyed the brief. Thank you, Mike.
Well, there are no questions. I want to thank you. Too many of our I want to say smaller conflicts or far away conflicts are not covered well. Your presentation tonight added a lot to understand what we were doing in Somalia in that period, 92 to 95. And I want to thank you for doing that for us. I look forward to when the book gets published. Please let us know, and we'll advise folks. We do send an email blast out to about 8,000 people that your book's published. Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, have a great holidays. May it be peaceful and quiet, and we'll talk to you in the new year.
Okay, Merry Christmas.
Yep.
Merry Christmas to everyone.